Howdy, Writer Eric S. here, asking the question, is Shazam, Fury of the Gods, the best superhero movie that's come out this year? We're going to be delving into a bit of a spoiler-free review here. It's going to be kind of impromptu. I'm just going to kind of chat and get out my ideas. Just a little supplemental contextual information. It's directed by David F. Sandberg and written by Henry Gayden and Chris Morgan. It's New Line Cinema's and DC Studios' latest superhero flick, coming out, as far as I know, today at the time of recording, March 17th, 2023. I would say I, just full disclosure, watched it March 15th during a critics screening. And you may want to hear me out before you spend $20 on that movie ticket. If you're just looking for a watch it or don't, I'll say that overall I liked the film. And of the flicks I've watched this year since January, I preferred Shazam. Given the only other option is like Quantumania, that's not, a high bar. I wasn't a huge fan of Quantumania, but that's not what this is about. However, Shazam does have its flaws. Unfortunately, those flaws are largely plot-related, and they involve the narrative and certain characters and plot details, so I can't really get into specifics. We'll touch on them later. But we can, however, talk about the positives. First, the acting. I especially enjoyed Lusy and Helen Mirren's performances as two of the three daughters of Atlas. They have an entertaining, if childish, rapport between the two of them, and their interactions between themselves and Billy Batson and the family are often entertaining. I especially liked this bit involving a bird. You'll see. They are also consistently a necessary threat. They are very menacing, especially Helen Mirren. Every time she was on screen, I enjoyed it. Second, shot composition and just overall the inclusion of some very striking imagery. There's this shot relatively early on of a prison cell. You've got a character in it, and he's looking out through the bars, and you got moonlight coming in. It's just, gorgeous. There's also some other very similar striking shots. I especially liked Lusy. She rides a dragon. It's very fun. Speaking of fun, fan service, okay? Fans of Greek mythology will spend a good chunk of the film pointing out the little details, like, oh, I know what that is, as it draws characters and monsters out of the likes of Ovid's Metamorphoses and Homer's Odyssey and paints them in this new modern context. I'll touch on this more in the literary traditions section a little later on in the review, but the film took some interesting risks with its structure. We'll talk about that later. The dialogue. Okay, I'll concede I personally was not a fan of it, but I do think it did some interesting things, though that may just be the genre. Honestly, it left me cringing a fair amount of the time, and most of my fellow audience members spent a fair chunk of the film laughing hysterically. They seemed to find it very funny. The idea of these repeatedly immature and often childish lines by Billy and the fellow foster kids, they seem to like it. For me, at least, the comedy missed. I found almost none of the dialogue that funny in those areas, with a couple of notable exceptions, usually involving Helen Mirren or Lusy. I suspect the writers were attempting to be evocative of films such as Stand By Me, with its authentic, childlike, or early teenager dialogue. Some of these lines could create feelings of nostalgia for adults who, as kids, acted out, especially modern adults around my age who spent, their teenage years playing video games, being nerdy, having very passionate interests. You see a lot of that in the foster kid dynamics, and I actually really appreciated that. Furthermore, the target audience, you got to understand, it's teenagers. This is a film written for teenagers. It's got a PG-13 rating. Going to be a lot of younger, early teenagers, late teenagers watching this film, and they're going to find a lot of this stuff very relatable, I think, especially with a lot of foster kid issues. adding to the immaturity. And this is kind of approaching more of a criticism for me. The film features some rather striking violence. It's almost exclusively off-screen with a couple of minor exceptions, but the way the goddesses treat humans, especially in the film's first half, creates an impression of a child playing with and throwing away their toys. Some of these images may be a little disturbing for children, but for me, it reminded me of cartoon violence. At points, almost like Ren and Stimpy or Ed, Edd and Eddy, that early, like, 90s, the way that they hurt people is it's a little over the top, and I think it works because as far as the relationship between humans and the goddesses, they don't have the same system of morality as us, so how they act around people is, like, there's this throwaway line about, like, oh, if you hadn't stepped in, I would have rearranged his organs, and it's like, oh, wow, okay, that's kind of graphic. Finally, and I found this aspect of the film especially interesting, the film at least attempts to embrace literary traditions associated with Greek theater. The idea of the tragic hero is kind of explored in depth with Billy Batson's character. He goes on the quest and the classical hero's journey that one associates with Joseph Campbell and the monomyth, as well as a few more plot-specific details that I can't get into. Again, sorry for spoiler reasons. Suffice to say that at some point in the narrative, the writers evoke a very specific literary trope that is considered cliché and use it unironically. It is used... This is what I meant when I said that it takes some interesting risks. The cliche, which I cannot name, is used to evoke this Greek literary tradition. That being said, it's still a cliche, and I found it ultimately unsatisfying. There's a reason modern writers avoid this trope like the plague. It doesn't make for a very satisfying moment. Well, that's all for today. I hope you enjoyed the spoiler-free review. If you want to see me talk more about nerdy literary stuff, I've got a lot of content planned. Insert call to action here, like and subscribe. You know how it is. Take care.